The crimson sunset painted the dusty horizon as Rowan Xander rode wearily into the outskirts of Dillon, Montana. The sound of hoofbeats fading into the whisper of the cottonwood trees along the creek. His eyes, the color of weathered sage, narrowed when he spotted a woman kneeling at the water's edge, frantically scrubbing at a dress stained dark with what could only be blood. It was the spring of 1879, and Rowan had been riding for 3 days straight after delivering a herd of cattle to Helena. He'd seen plenty in his 30 years gunfights, stampedes, the worst and best of humanity, but something about the desperation in the woman's movements made him rein in his horse, a tall buckskin gelding named Whiskey. The woman hadn't noticed him yet, her attention fixed on erasing the evidence from the fabric clutched in her trembling hands. Long copper hair had escaped its pins, falling around her face like a curtain. Her shoulders shook with either exertion or silent tears. Rowan couldn't tell which. He cleared his throat softly, not wanting to startle her. "Madam, you all right there?" She whirled around, eyes wide with fear, hands dripping creek water and pink-tinged rivulets. For a moment they simply stared at each other. Her eyes were the deepest blue he'd ever seen, like Montana skies before a storm. Her face was finely drawn, with high cheekbones dusted with freckles. She couldn't have been more than 25. "I didn't mean to frighten you," Rowan said, dismounting slowly, hands visible to show he meant no harm. His spurs jangled as his boots hit the dirt. The woman clutched the wet dress to her chest. A plain calico thing, practical for frontier living, now ruined by what appeared to be a significant amount of blood. "Are you hurt?" he asked, concern evident in his voice as he took a tentative step forward. She looked up and said, "It's not mine." Those 3 words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that Rowan couldn't begin to decipher. Her expression was guarded, but beneath it lurked something like defiance. "Name's Rowan Xander," he offered, keeping his distance. "I'm just passing through on my way back from a cattle drive." "Olivia James," she replied after a moment's hesitation. "Miss Olivia James." Rowan nodded, noting the absence of a wedding band on her finger. "That's quite a lot of blood for it not to be yours, Miss James." Her jaw tightened. "It belongs to a deer. Shot it myself this morning. The butchering was messier than anticipated." There was something in her voice, a slight tremor perhaps, that didn't quite match her story, but Rowan wasn't one to pry into others' business. Everyone in these parts had secrets. Some were just bloodier than others. "You've got family nearby?" he asked. Olivia shook her head. "I have a small homestead about a mile east. I live alone." That wasn't common for a young woman in these parts. Most unmarried women lived with family or worked as schoolteachers, boarding with respectable families in town. "That's not the safest arrangement, if you don't mind my saying so." "I didn't ask for your opinion on my living arrangements, Mr. Xander," she replied, some color returning to her cheeks. "I can take care of myself." "Clearly," he said, gesturing to the bloodied dress. "Your deer hunting skills must be impressive." For a moment he thought she might smile, but her expression remained wary. She wrung out the dress, the creek water running pink around her hands. "I should be getting back," she said, standing. The setting sun caught in her hair, turning it to living flame. "I'll ride with you," Rowan offered. "Make sure you get home safe." "That won't be necessary." "It's getting dark, Miss James. These hills have mountain lions, wolves, and sometimes men who are worse than either." He adjusted his hat. "I'll keep my distance if that's your worry." Olivia studied him, taking in his trail-worn appearance, the dust on his denim pants, the worn leather of his boots, the 6-shooter holstered at his hip. Whatever calculation she made seemed to come out in his favor. "Very well, Mr. Xander," she conceded, "but just to the edge of my property." As they walked, Olivia several paces ahead and Rowan leading Whiskey by the reins, he noticed she kept glancing over her shoulder not at him but back toward Dillon. "Expecting company?" he asked casually. "No," she said too quickly. "Just a habit." Rowan had developed a good sense for trouble during his years on the frontier. Right now, that sense was humming like a rattler's warning. "That dress," he began carefully. "Dear blood, you said." Olivia stopped walking and turned to face him. In the fading light, her eyes were dark and unreadable. "Mr. Xander, I appreciate your escort but not your questions. We all have things we'd rather not discuss with strangers." "Fair enough," he conceded. "Though in my experience, bloody secrets have a way of surfacing at the worst possible moments." She clutched the sodden dress tighter. "Then I suppose I'll deal with that moment when it comes." They continued in silence until a small cabin came into view, nestled against a stand of pines. A thin wisp of smoke curled from the stone chimney, and a well-tended vegetable garden stretched to one side. It was modest but neat, with curtains in the windows and a rocking chair on the small porch. Not what he expected from a woman living alone. "This is far enough," Olivia said, stopping at a split-rail fence that marked her property line. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Xander." Rowan tipped his hat. "If you're sure you'll be all right. I've managed this long." She offered a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good evening to you." He watched her walk up the path to her cabin, noticing how she scanned the surroundings before unlocking her door. Once inside, she closed it firmly, and moments later, the curtains were drawn. Rowan should have continued on to Dillon, found a room at the hotel, and forgotten about Olivia James and her bloodied dress. That would have been the sensible thing to do. Instead, he led Whiskey into the trees a short distance away, tied him securely, and settled down to watch the cabin. He told himself it was just to ensure her safety, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. There was a story here, and something in those storm blue eyes had snared his curiosity like a fish on a hook. As full darkness descended, Rowan's vigilance was rewarded or perhaps punished when he spotted movement on the road leading to Olivia's homestead. 3 riders approached slowly, their features indistinct in the moonlight. They stopped at the same fence where he had bid Olivia goodbye and dismounted. From his vantage point, Rowan could see them conferring, their voices too low to make out words. One man pointed toward the cabin, another shook his head, and the third, the largest of the group, made a slashing motion with his hand that needed no interpretation. Trouble had found Olivia James, just as Rowan had suspected it would. The men tied their horses to the fence and began moving toward the cabin with the practiced stealth of predators. Rowan drew his revolver and moved parallel to them, keeping to the shadows of the tree line. The leader of the trio reached the porch first, gesturing for the others to circle around to the back. Rowan knew he had only moments to act. He stepped out from the trees, his revolver aimed squarely at the man on the porch. "Evening, gentlemen," Rowan called, his voice carrying in the night air. "I believe you're trespassing." The man on the porch whirled around, his hand dropping to his gun. "Who the hell are you?" "Just a concerned citizen," Rowan replied, advancing slowly. "And you boys look like you're up to no good." The cabin door cracked open and Rowan caught a glimpse of Olivia, holding what appeared to be a shotgun. "Stay inside, Miss James," he called without taking his eyes off the intruders. "Xander," her voice came back, surprised. "What are you? These men were about to pay you an uninvited visit." The leader laughed, a harsh sound in the quiet night. "This ain't your business, Cowboy. We've got matters to settle with the lady." "Does it have something to do with that bloody dress she was washing in the creek?" Rowan asked, watching how the men exchanged glances. "So you know," the leader said, his posture shifting from surprise to menace. Then you're already involved. I don't know anything, Rowan clarified, except that 3 men sneaking up on a woman's cabin after dark rarely have honorable intentions. The standoff might have continued, but the cabin door suddenly flung open wide, and Olivia stepped onto the porch, shotgun raised. "Get off my land, Fletcher," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor Rowan could see in her hands. "You and your men have no business here." The man called Fletcher smiled, revealing a gold tooth that gleamed in the moonlight. "We have every right, considering what you did to my brother." Olivia's grip on the shotgun tightened. "Your brother got what he deserved. A knife in the gut," Fletcher snarled. "For trying to claim what was rightfully his. Nothing of mine has ever belonged to a Sullivan," Olivia shot back. "Not my land, not my body, not anything." Rowan kept his gun trained on Fletcher, but divided his attention between the 3 men. "Miss James, I think it's time you told me what's really going on here." "Jebediah Sullivan tried to force himself on me this morning," Olivia said, her voice cold with rage. "He broke into my home while I was preparing breakfast, said he'd been watching me for weeks. Said no woman should have land that could be worked by a man." Her knuckles were white around the shotgun. "When he put his hands on me, I defended myself. The knife was on the table. I didn't think I just acted." Fletcher's face contorted with fury. "You gutted him like an animal." "He acted like one," she retorted. Rowan could see the situation deteriorating rapidly. "Your brother made his choice, Fletcher. He broke the law, threatened a woman. Where is he now?" "Dead," Fletcher spat. "Bled out on the trail as we were taking him to the doctor in Dillon." Olivia's composure faltered slightly at this news, but she maintained her aim. "I never meant to kill him. I just wanted him to stop." "It doesn't matter what you meant," Fletcher said, his hand inching toward his gun again. "Sullivan justice doesn't need a judge or jury." Rowan stepped between Fletcher and the porch. "The law might see things differently. Self-defense is recognized in these parts." "The law," Fletcher scoffed. "Sheriff Cooper's been in Sullivan pockets for years. He'll see what we tell him to see." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Rowan knew that bullets could start flying any moment, and Olivia's chances against 3 armed men, even with him helping, weren't good. "Here's what's going to happen," Rowan said, his voice level. "You and your men are going to leave. Miss James will come with me to Dillon tomorrow to speak with the sheriff. If your brother was assaulting her, she had every right to defend herself." "And if we don't agree to your plan," Fletcher challenged. Rowan's smile was cold. "Then we find out who's faster with a gun. But I should warn you, I've never lost that particular contest." There was something in Rowan's demeanor that gave Fletcher pause. Perhaps it was the calm way he held his weapon or the lack of fear in his eyes. Whatever it was, Fletcher took a step back. "This isn't over," he warned. "Not by a long shot." "It is for tonight," Rowan replied. Fletcher signaled to his men, who emerged from the shadows with visible reluctance. They backed toward their horses, keeping their eyes on Rowan and Olivia. "We'll be watching," Fletcher called as they mounted up. "Justice will be served, one way or another." They rode off into the darkness, the sound of hoofbeats gradually fading until silence reclaimed the night. Only then did Rowan holster his weapon and turn to Olivia. "You should have told me the truth," he said quietly. Olivia lowered the shotgun, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "Would you have believed me? A woman alone, claiming self-defense against a man from one of the most powerful families in the territory." Rowan considered this. "I'd like to think I would have." "Well, now you know." She gestured to the cabin door. "You might as well come inside, Mr. Xander. I suspect we have a long night ahead of us." The interior of Olivia's cabin was as neat and practical as the outside. A small table with 2 chairs occupied one corner, a cast iron stove another. A narrow bed with a handmade quilt was positioned along the far wall, and bookshelves lined another surprisingly well-stocked for a frontier home. Olivia placed the shotgun on hooks above the door and moved to stoke the fire in the stove. "I can offer you coffee," she said, her back to him. "Or there might be some whiskey somewhere." "Coffee is fine," Rowan replied, removing his hat and placing it on the table. "We need clear heads to figure this out." As Olivia busied herself with the coffee pot, Rowan noticed a trunk partially visible beneath the bed, its lock broken. Clothes were spilling out as if someone had rifled through them hastily. "Sullivan's work?" he asked, nodding toward the trunk. Olivia glanced over her shoulder and nodded. "He was looking for money, I think. Or valuables." She placed the coffee pot on the stove. "He seemed surprised when I fought back." "Men like that usually are," Rowan said. "They expect fear, not resistance." Olivia turned to face him, leaning against the stove. "Why did you stay, after you walked me home, I mean?" Rowan considered the question. Something didn't feel right. "The way you kept looking over your shoulder, the blood on that dress. My instincts said there was more to the story." "Your instincts saved my life," she said softly. "Those men would have killed me. Maybe, or maybe that shotgun of yours would have evened the odds." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "It's not loaded. I've never fired a gun in my life." Rowan stared at her in disbelief, then let out a low whistle. "That was a dangerous bluff, Miss James." "Olivia," she corrected him. "I think we're well past formalities at this point." "Olivia," he agreed, liking the way her name felt on his tongue. "We need to talk about what happens next. The Sullivans won't let this go." She moved to the table and sat down across from him, pushing a stray lock of copper hair behind her ear. "I know, but I won't run. This land is mine, legally and rightfully. My father homesteaded it 10 years ago. When he died last winter, he left it to me, his only child. And the Sullivans want it," Olivia nodded. "Their ranch borders my property to the north. There's a year-round spring on my land that would be valuable to them for their cattle. They offered to buy it for a fraction of its worth after my father passed. When I refused, the accidents started happening." "Accidents?" "A broken fence that let my milk cow wander off. A small fire in my woodshed. Nothing I could prove was them, but—" She shrugged. "Then Jebediah showed up this morning, saying he'd come to make me a final offer." The coffee pot began to boil, and Olivia rose to attend to it. Rowan watched her efficient movements, noting the strength in her slender frame. She'd survived alone out here for months, enduring the Sullivans' intimidation without backing down. It was impressive, to say the least. "Sheriff Cooper," Rowan said as she placed a steaming cup before him. "You think he's truly in Sullivan's pocket?" Olivia sat down again, cradling her own cup. "I know he is. When I reported the fire, he suggested I'd probably left a lantern too close to the kindling. Didn't even come out to look." Rowan took a sip of the strong, black coffee. "Then we need another approach. Is there a circuit judge due in Dillon anytime soon?" "Not for at least a month," Olivia replied. "And I don't think the Sullivans will wait that long for their version of justice." "No, they won't," Rowan agreed. "Which means we need evidence that can't be ignored, even by a corrupt sheriff, something that would force his hand." Olivia's brow furrowed in thought. "Like what?" "Witnesses, for one. People who have seen the Sullivans threatening you. Anyone in town who might have heard Jebediah boasting about his intentions toward you or your property." "There's Mrs. Peterson at the general store," Olivia said slowly. "She overheard Jebediah telling his friends he'd have the James place one way or another last week. And Tom at the livery stable, he refused to rent a horse to Jebediah once because he was drunk and talking about paying a visit to that stubborn James woman." Rowan nodded. "That's a start. We also need to document the state of your cabin after Jebediah broke in. And He hesitated. We need to locate his body. Olivia paled. His body? Why? Because if what you're saying is true, and I believe it is, the wounds on his body will show he was facing you when he was stabbed. That supports your claim of self-defense. But Fletcher said they were taking him to the doctor in Dillon, and that he died on the way, Rowan reminded her, which means they either buried him somewhere or they took him to the undertaker in town. Olivia shuddered and wrapped her hands tighter around her coffee cup. What you're suggesting, investigating, gathering evidence, it could take days. Yes, Rowan agreed. And you can't stay here alone during that time. The Sullivans will be back. I'm not leaving my home, she said firmly. I'm not suggesting you do. Rowan met her gaze steadily. I'm suggesting I stay. Surprise flickered across Olivia's face. Why would you do that? You don't know me. You're just passing through. It was a fair question, and one Rowan had been asking himself since he decided to watch over her cabin. By all rights, he should be in Dillon by now, enjoying a hot bath and a proper meal at the hotel. Instead, he was involving himself in a potentially deadly dispute between a solitary woman and one of the territory's most powerful families. Let's just say I have a strong dislike for bullies, he finally replied. Especially ones who threaten women living alone. Olivia studied him as if trying to discern some hidden motive. There must be more to it than that. Rowan shrugged. Maybe there is. Or maybe I'm just a fool who can't mind his own business. He offered her a slight smile. Either way, I'm your best chance against the Sullivans right now. After a moment, Olivia nodded. All right, Mr. Xander. Rowan, we'll do this your way, but I want to be clear about something. What's that? I'm not some damsel who needs rescuing. I've been taking care of myself since I was 16 years old. I may need help with the Sullivans, but I won't be treated like I'm helpless. Rowan's respect for her notched higher. I wouldn't dream of it, he assured her. Partners, then. Olivia extended her hand across the table. Partners. When their hands met, Rowan was struck by the contrast, his large, calloused palm engulfing her smaller one. But there was nothing fragile about her grip. It was firm and confident, like the woman herself. Now, he said, releasing her hand, we need a plan for tomorrow. As they talked late into the night, outlining strategies and contingencies, Rowan found himself increasingly drawn to Olivia. It wasn't just her beauty, though that was undeniable, but her resilience, her quick mind, and the quiet determination that seemed to radiate from her very being. By the time they finally agreed, Rowan would sleep in the chair by the door while Olivia took the bed. He had to admit to himself that his interest in her situation had become more than just a passing concern for justice. Much more. Dawn broke clear and crisp over the Montana landscape as Rowan stepped onto Olivia's porch, stretching muscles stiff from a night spent in a hard wooden chair. The air smelled of pine and morning dew, with smoke from the cabin's chimney adding a homey touch that belied the tension of their situation. He'd risen before Olivia, careful not to wake her as he slipped outside to check for any sign of Sullivan men watching the property. Finding nothing amiss, he had retrieved whiskey from where he'd left him in the trees and brought the horse to Olivia's small barn, giving him fresh water and a measure of oats he found there. Now, scanning the surrounding hills again, Rowan considered their next move. They had agreed that Olivia would stay at the cabin while he rode into Dillon to gather information and discreetly approach potential witnesses. It wasn't ideal leaving her alone, but they needed to know what they were facing, and Olivia had insisted she would be safer staying out of town for the time being. The cabin door opened behind him, and Olivia stepped out, dressed in a simple blue calico dress that matched her eyes. Her copper hair was neatly braided and pinned up, making her look every inch the respectable homesteader. "Good morning," she said, joining him at the porch railing. "I've made breakfast if you're hungry." Rowan nodded. "Starving, actually. Didn't realize how long it's been since I had a proper meal." They ate in companionable silence eggs, bacon, and biscuits that Olivia had somehow managed to prepare without waking him. It was the best food Rowan had tasted in months, after weeks of trail cooking during the cattle drive. "You'll be careful in town," Olivia said as they finished their coffee. "It wasn't a question." "Always am," Rowan assured her. "I'll keep my ears open and my mouth shut. No one needs to know I'm connected to you in any way. And if you run into the Sullivans—" "I'll tip my hat and keep moving," he said. "The last thing we need is a confrontation before we're ready." Olivia nodded, but worry still creased her brow. "There's something else you should know before you go." "What's that?" "The Sullivans don't just run cattle," she said, lowering her voice as if the walls might have ears. "There are rumors they're involved in rustling operations across the territory. My father suspected they were using our spring as a watering hole for stolen cattle before moving them on to buyers in Idaho." Rowan whistled low. "That would explain their desperate interest in your land, and why they'd go to such lengths to intimidate you." "It's just rumors," Olivia cautioned. "Nothing anyone could prove. Still, it's worth keeping in mind." Rowan stood and reached for his hat. "I should get going. The earlier I start, the more I can accomplish before the Sullivans realize I'm asking questions." At the door, Olivia handed him a small cloth-wrapped package. "Biscuits for the road," she explained. "And Rowan, thank you for everything." The sincerity in her voice caught him off guard. "Don't thank me yet," he replied, tipping his hat. "Save that for when this is all over and you're safe." The ride into Dillon took less than an hour at an easy trot. The town itself was typical of frontier settlements that had grown with the coming of the railroad, a main street lined with false-fronted businesses, a couple of cross streets with smaller shops and homes, and scattered dwellings marking its edges. Rowan tied whiskey at the hitching post outside the general store, figuring it was as good a place as any to start gathering information. If Mrs. Peterson had indeed overheard Jebediah Sullivan's threats, she might be willing to speak about them to a sympathetic ear. The store was empty of customers when he entered, the bell above the door announcing his arrival. A plump, gray-haired woman looked up from where she was arranging fabric bolts on a shelf. "Good morning," she greeted him. "What can I help you with today?" "Just passing through," Rowan replied casually, removing his hat. "Thought I'd stock up on a few supplies before heading on." "You've come to the right place, Mrs. Peterson, for that's who she must be," said with a smile. "We carry everything a traveler might need." As Rowan browsed the shelves, selecting coffee, tobacco, and a few other essentials, he engaged her in friendly conversation. He mentioned he'd been working a cattle drive, was thinking of settling in the area if the right opportunity presented itself. "Land around here is mostly claimed," Mrs. Peterson told him, wrapping his purchases in brown paper. "Though there's always folks willing to sell for the right price." "I heard there might be a place east of town," Rowan ventured. "Small homestead with a good spring. Belongs to a James family, I believe," Mrs. Peterson's hand stilled briefly. "Olivia James," she said, her voice noticeably cooler. "That property's not for sale, mister, no matter what certain parties might tell you." Rowan nodded thoughtfully. "Shame to hear that. Sounded promising from the description." "Miss James has had more than her share of interested parties," Mrs. Peterson said, fixing him with a shrewd look, "including some who don't take no for an answer." "Is that right?" Rowan leaned against the counter, affecting casual interest. "Sounds like there might be a story there." Mrs. Peterson glanced toward the door, then lowered her voice. There is, but it's not one I'd repeat to just anyone, especially not with Jebediah Sullivan being found dead yesterday. Rowan feigned surprise. Dead? What happened? That's what everyone's wondering, the shopkeeper replied. His brothers brought him to Doc Miller yesterday morning, already gone. Said he'd had an accident on their property. She sniffed disapprovingly. But there's whispers it wasn't no accident. Whispers about what exactly, Mrs.? Peterson studied him for a long moment, as if deciding whether he could be trusted. Jebediah was a known troublemaker, drunk more often than not, had his eye on the James place for months, made no secret of it. She tied the string around Rowan's package with more force than necessary. Last week, he was in here boasting to his friends about how he'd convince Olivia to sell if his brother's offers didn't work. Convince her how? Rowan pressed. Use your imagination, Mrs. Peterson said flatly. Men like Jebediah Sullivan don't respect a woman's right to say no to anything. The bell above the door jingled, and Mrs. Peterson straightened, her expression immediately shifting to professional pleasantness. Rowan turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered man entering, the silver star on his vest marking him as the sheriff. "Morning, Martha," the lawman said, nodding to Mrs. Peterson before turning his attention to Rowan. "Don't believe I've seen you in Dillon before. Just passing through," Rowan replied easily. "Rowan Xander, Sheriff Cooper." The man extended a hand which Rowan shook briefly. Cooper's grip was firm, his eyes assessing as they took in Rowan's trail-worn appearance. "What brings you to our town, Mr. Xander?" delivered a herd to Helena. "Thought I'd take a more scenic route back to Wyoming." Cooper nodded, seeming to accept this. "Planning to stay long, a day or two?" "Just long enough to rest my horse and myself." "Well, Dillon's a peaceful town," Cooper said, emphasizing the word peaceful in a way that seemed almost like a warning. "We like to keep it that way." "Understood," Rowan replied. Cooper turned his attention to Mrs. Peterson. "Martha, I'll need some coffee and sugar. The wife sent me to fetch it." As she moved to collect his items, Cooper lowered his voice. "And I'd appreciate it if you'd be more careful about discussing Sullivan business with strangers. Fletcher was in my office this morning, quite upset about the rumors flying around town." Mrs. Peterson's lips pressed into a thin line, but she nodded curtly. "Of course, Sheriff. God forbid anyone speak the truth about that family." Cooper's face hardened. "Just looking to prevent unnecessary trouble." The tension in the store was palpable as Rowan gathered his purchases and paid. "Thank you for your help, Mrs. Peterson," he said, tipping his hat. "Sheriff," he acknowledged with a nod before stepping outside. As he secured his supplies to his saddle, Rowan considered what he'd learned. Mrs. Peterson clearly knew something about Jebediah's interest in Olivia's land, and the sheriff's warning suggested the Sullivans were indeed as influential as Olivia had claimed. His next stop was the livery stable, where he found Tom, a wiry man of about 50, shoeing a bay mare. After arranging for whiskey to be fed and watered, Rowan struck up a conversation, eventually steering it toward the Sullivans. "Heard there was some trouble with one of them recently," he said, keeping his tone casual as he leaned against a post. Tom glanced up from his work. "You could say that. Jebediah Sullivan's dead, being laid out at the undertaker's as we speak." "What happened to him?" Tom shrugged. "Depends who you ask. His brothers claim he fell on his own knife while out checking fence lines, others say." He trailed off, eyeing Rowan suspiciously. "Why are you so interested, mister?" "Just trying to get a feel for the town," Rowan replied. "I make it a point to know which families might be trouble before I decide to stick around somewhere." This seemed to satisfy Tom, who returned to his work. "Well, the Sullivans own half the county and think they own the rest. Jebediah was the youngest, mean as a snake when he was drinking, which was most of the time. He looked up again. Refused to rent him a horse last month when he came in liquored up, talking about riding out to the James place to settle things with Miss Olivia. Settle what things? Her pa homesteaded a nice piece of land the Sullivans have wanted for years. When he passed, they figured a woman alone would be easy to push around. Tom smiled grimly. They figured wrong. Miss Olivia's got more spine than most men I know. Sounds like the kind of woman who might defend herself if threatened, Rowan observed. Tom's hammer paused mid-stroke. You asking if I think Miss Olivia had something to do with Jebediah's death? I'm not asking anything, Rowan said carefully. Just making conversation. Tom studied him for a long moment. Word of advice, stranger, be careful what kind of conversations you have in Dillon. Some questions can get a man shot. Noted, Rowan replied. Thanks for looking after my horse. His final stop was the undertaker's, a somber building at the edge of town. The pretext of inquiring about burial plots for a fictional relative got him through the door, where he found the undertaker preparing a body for viewing Jebediah Sullivan. No doubt. The deceased was a burly man in his early 30s, with a face that, even in death, suggested a habitual sneer. What interested Rowan most, however, was the wound visible on the man's abdomen, where his shirt had been cut away a single, upward thrust that would indeed be consistent with someone defending themselves against a larger attacker. Tragic business, the undertaker commented, noticing Rowan's gaze on the corpse. Young Mr. Sullivan had his whole life ahead of him. How did it happen? Rowan asked, feigning appropriate solemnity. Accident, according to his brothers, the man replied, though his tone suggested doubt. But between you and me, Doc Miller had some questions about the wound. Said it didn't look like the kind of injury a man gives himself by falling. The sheriff investigating, the undertaker gave a dry laugh. Sheriff Cooper doesn't investigate anything that might upset the Sullivans. He took their statement and called it a day. This confirmed what Olivia had told him about Cooper being in the family's pocket. It also meant that if they were going to clear her name, they'd need to build a case so strong that even Cooper couldn't ignore it. By mid-afternoon, Rowan had learned enough to know they faced an uphill battle. The Sullivans were indeed as powerful and feared as Olivia had suggested, and while some townspeople like Mrs. Peterson and Tom seemed to hold sympathetic views toward Olivia, few would likely risk the family's wrath by speaking out publicly. He was preparing to leave town when a commotion near the saloon caught his attention. Fletcher Sullivan and another man, presumably the third brother, were engaged in a heated discussion with a younger man Rowan didn't recognize. Rowan moved closer, pretending to adjust Whiskey's saddle while straining to hear their conversation. Saw her heading toward town yesterday morning, covered in blood, the young man was saying. Before you started spreading that story about Jeb having an accident. Fletcher grabbed the man's collar. You didn't see anything, Miller. And if you know what's good for you, you'll keep your mouth shut. Or what? Miller challenged, though his voice quavered slightly. You'll have an accident too, the third Sullivan brother stepped forward menacingly. Your pa's in debt to our bank, boy. Be a shame if we had to foreclose on your family's ranch. Miller paled but held his ground. That doesn't change what I saw, and others saw her too, washing something at the creek. Fletcher's expression darkened further. Who else saw her? Miller's eyes flicked briefly toward Rowan, then away. I don't know, just heard people talking. Rowan realized he needed to leave immediately. If the Sullivans connected him to Olivia or realized he'd been asking questions around town, they might follow him back to her cabin. He mounted Whiskey and rode out of town at a casual pace, not wanting to attract attention. Once clear of Dillon, however, he urged the horse to a gallop, taking a roundabout route back to Olivia's homestead in case anyone was following. The sun was beginning to set when he finally approached the cabin, relieved to see smoke still rising from the chimney. Olivia was safe, at least for now. She met him at the door, shotgun in hand, loaded this time, he noted with approval. "You were gone longer than expected," she said, lowering the weapon as he dismounted. "I was starting to worry." "Had to take a detour," Rowan explained, leading Whiskey to the barn. "Wasn't sure if I was being followed." Olivia's face paled. "Were you?" "Don't think so, but better safe than sorry." He began unsaddling his horse. "We've got problems, though. The Sullivans are telling everyone Jebediah died in an accident, but there's a witness who saw you heading to town yesterday morning covered in blood." "That's impossible," Olivia said, following him into the barn. "I never went near town. After what happened with Jebediah, I went straight to the creek to wash the blood off." Rowan frowned. "Which direction is the creek from here?" "West, toward Dillon." "Then someone could have seen you from the road," Rowan concluded. "And the Sullivans know about it. I overheard Fletcher threatening a young man named Miller who claimed to have spotted you." Olivia sank onto a hay bale, the implication sinking in. "So they know I killed Jebediah." "They just can't prove it yet. But they're looking for witnesses," Rowan said, sitting beside her, "and when they find them, they'll use it to convince Sheriff Cooper to arrest me." Olivia finished his thought. "And once I'm in his custody—" "You might have an accident of your own," Rowan said grimly. "We need to move faster than I thought." Olivia looked up at him, determination replacing the momentary fear in her eyes. "What did you find out in town?" As Rowan detailed everything he'd learned from Mrs. Peterson's account of Jebediah's threats to Tom's refusal to rent him a horse, to the undertaker's doubts about the accident story, Olivia listened intently, occasionally asking questions that revealed a sharp, strategic mind. "So we have potential witnesses who could confirm Jebediah's intentions toward me and my property," she summarized. "And medical evidence that suggests the wound wasn't self-inflicted, but will it be enough?" Rowan ran a hand through his hair. "Honestly, with Cooper in Sullivan's pocket, probably not. We need more, something that would make it impossible for the sheriff to side with them without exposing his own corruption." "Like evidence of their rustling operation," Olivia suggested. Rowan stared at her. "That would certainly do it. But finding that kind of evidence would be dangerous. The Sullivans wouldn't hesitate to kill anyone who threatened to expose them." "They're already planning to kill me," Olivia pointed out. "What do I have to lose?" "Your life," Rowan said flatly. "And I didn't sign up to watch you throw it away." Their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills. There was something fierce and unyielding in Olivia's gaze that both frustrated and captivated him. "We'll find another way," he finally said, standing. "Tonight, we'll strengthen our defenses here. Tomorrow, I'll try to find this Miller fellow, see what exactly he saw, and if he'd be willing to testify on your behalf." Olivia remained seated, her expression thoughtful. "And if he won't? If we can't build a strong enough case," Rowan sighed. "Then we might have to consider you leaving Montana, at least for a while." "No," she said immediately. "This land is all I have left of my father. I won't abandon it. Even if staying means risking your life, even then." She stood, squaring her shoulders. "But I won't ask you to risk yours, Rowan. You've already done more than anyone could expect from a passing stranger." Something in her voice, a note of resignation, perhaps made Rowan realize she was giving him an out, a chance to walk away before things got worse. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, surprising himself with the certainty he felt. "Not until you're safe." The look Olivia gave him, then part gratitude, part wonder, stirred something in his chest that he hadn't felt in a very long time. It was dangerous, this growing attachment to her, but Rowan found he didn't care. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing me, for staying." Before he could respond, a flicker of movement outside the barn door caught his attention. Rowan's hand dropped to his holster as he moved protectively in front of Olivia. "Who's there?" he called, drawing his revolver. "Show yourself." To his surprise, the young man he'd seen arguing with the Sullivans in town stepped into view, hands raised in surrender. "Don't shoot," he said quickly. "I'm not here to cause trouble. My name's Daniel Miller. I need to talk to Miss James." Rowan kept his gun trained on the newcomer. "How did you find this place? Were you followed?" "I know where the James homestead is," Miller replied. "And no, I made sure no one followed me. Took a route through the hills." Olivia stepped out from behind Rowan. "Why are you here, Mr. Miller?" Miller lowered his hands slowly. "Because I know what really happened to Jebediah Sullivan, and I think you're in danger, Miss James." Rowan and Olivia exchanged glances. "Inside," Rowan decided, gesturing toward the cabin with his gun. "And you'd better be telling the truth, Miller, for your sake." Once inside with the door barred and the curtains drawn, Daniel Miller told his story. He was the son of a small rancher whose property bordered Sullivan land. Yesterday morning, he'd been checking his father's cattle when he witnessed Jebediah riding toward Olivia's homestead, clearly intoxicated and muttering to himself. "I knew he'd been making threats about your land," Daniel explained, accepting the coffee Olivia offered. "So I followed him, thinking he might cause trouble. I saw him break into your cabin, Miss James. I was about to intervene when I heard the commotion inside." "Why didn't you help her?" Rowan demanded, still suspicious of the young man's motives. Daniel flushed with shame. "I froze. By the time I got my wits about me, it was over. Jebediah staggered out, bleeding badly, and collapsed on his horse. I panicked and hid. Then I saw his brothers arrive. They must have been waiting nearby." "Waiting," Olivia repeated. "You mean they knew what Jebediah planned to do?" Daniel nodded grimly. "I heard them arguing. Fletcher was furious that Jebediah had gone off half-cocked instead of waiting for their signal. They were supposed to confront you together, force you to sign over your property. And when they found him stabbed," Rowan prompted, "they decided to use it to their advantage," Daniel continued. "Fletcher said they'd claim it was an accident, then find witnesses who saw you covered in blood. They'd use that to convince Cooper to arrest you." He paused, his expression grave. "And once you were in jail, they'd make sure you never stood trial." Olivia paled but remained composed. "Why are you telling us this, Mr. Miller? You're putting yourself at risk." "Because my father taught me right from wrong," Daniel replied simply. "And because the Sullivans have been bullying folks around here for too long. What they plan to do to you, what Jebediah tried to do, it's wrong. And I can't keep quiet about it, even if it costs my family our ranch." Rowan studied the young man, searching for any sign of deception and finding none. Daniel Miller appeared to be exactly what he claimed, a decent person caught in a difficult situation, trying to do the right thing. "Would you be willing to testify to what you saw?" Rowan asked. "Not just to Sheriff Cooper, but to a circuit judge if necessary." Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, though I doubt Cooper would listen. He's been in Sullivan's pocket for years." "We need to go above Cooper's head," Olivia said thoughtfully. "The territorial marshal in Helena might be beyond the Sullivans' influence." "That's at least a 2-day ride," Rowan pointed out. "And the Sullivans are moving fast. They could have men watching the trails." Daniel leaned forward. "There might be another way to force Cooper's hand. I've suspected for some time that the Sullivans are running stolen cattle through their north pastures. My father caught glimpses of cattle with altered brands being moved at night." "Can you prove it?" Rowan asked. "Not yet, but I know when and where they move the herds." Daniel's eyes gleamed with determination. "If we could document it, get evidence of the altered brands, maybe even catch them in the act, not even Cooper could ignore it." The plan that emerged over the next hour was risky but potentially effective. Daniel knew that every third Thursday tomorrow night, the Sullivans moved rustled cattle from their holding pasture to a canyon where buyers from Idaho would be waiting. If they could capture evidence of this operation, they could use it as leverage not just to clear Olivia's name, but to break the Sullivans' power over the entire region. "It's dangerous," Rowan warned as they finalized the details. "If we're caught, they won't hesitate to kill all of us." "I know," Daniel acknowledged, "but I'm willing to take that risk." "As am I," Olivia added firmly. "This might be our only chance." Rowan looked between them. These two people who were willing to risk everything for justice, one a young woman determined to protect her home, the other a neighbor with a strong moral compass. He found himself admiring them both. "All right," he conceded, "but we do this smart. No unnecessary risks." As Daniel prepared to leave, he would return the following evening with the equipment they needed. Olivia walked him to the door. "Thank you, Mr. Miller," she said. "What you're doing takes courage." Daniel smiled shyly. "My friends call me Danny, and I'm not the brave one here, Miss James." "You stood up to Jebediah Sullivan alone. That takes real courage." After Daniel left, Olivia and Rowan strengthened the cabin's defenses as best they could, barricading windows, positioning furniture to create obstacles, and preparing escape routes in case they needed them. Working side by side in the small space, Rowan found himself increasingly aware of Olivia, the scent of lavender that clung to her hair, the graceful efficiency of her movements, the quiet determination in her eyes. He tried to focus on the task at hand, but his thoughts kept straying. "You're staring," Olivia observed as she loaded the shotgun he'd shown her how to use. Rowan didn't deny it. "Just wondering what kind of woman chooses to live alone on a homestead in the middle of nowhere, fighting off land grabbers and surviving against the odds." A smile tugged at her lips. "The stubborn kind, I suppose. The brave kind," he corrected her, echoing Daniel's words. Olivia set the shotgun aside and turned to face him fully. "My father taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what needs to be done despite being afraid. I've been terrified every day since he died, but this land is my home. I couldn't abandon it, even if that would have been safer." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was." Sadness flickered across her features. "He would have liked you, I think. He always said a person's character shows in their actions, not their words." She met his gaze directly. "Your actions say a lot about you, Rowan Xander. Not all of it good," he admitted. "I've made my share of mistakes. Haven't we all?" Olivia stepped closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gray in her blue eyes. "But when it mattered, when a stranger was in trouble, you chose to help. That counts for something." The air between them seemed charged with unspoken possibilities. Rowan was acutely aware of how easily he could close the distance between them, how much he wanted to. But the timing was wrong, the circumstances too precarious. "We should get some rest," he said, taking a reluctant step back. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Disappointment flickered briefly across Olivia's face, but she nodded. "You're right. I'll take the bed, you can have the chair again." "I'll keep first watch," Rowan said, moving toward the window. "You sleep. I'll wake you in a few hours." As Olivia prepared for bed, Rowan gazed out at the moonlit landscape, considering the dangerous path they'd chosen. Taking on the Sullivans meant risking not just their lives but Daniel's as well. Yet something told him it was the right course, perhaps their only course if Olivia was to have any chance of keeping her home and her freedom. And if he was honest with himself, there was another reason he was committed to seeing this through, one that had less to do with justice and more to do with the remarkable woman now sleeping behind him. Somehow, in the span of just 2 days, Olivia James had become important to him in ways he hadn't anticipated. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. Rowan checked his revolver, making sure it was fully loaded, then settled in for a long night of vigilance. Whatever happened tomorrow, he was determined that Olivia would survive it, even if that meant he might not. The following day passed with agonizing slowness as they prepared for the night's dangerous mission. Rowan spent the morning teaching Olivia to shoot properly, using tin cans as targets behind the cabin. "Remember," he instructed as she aimed the revolver he'd lent her, "squeeze the trigger, don't pull it, and be ready for the kick." Olivia's first few shots went wide, but she improved quickly, her determination evident in the set of her jaw. By midday, she was hitting targets consistently. "You're a natural," Rowan observed as she reloaded the weapon. Olivia smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face and made his heart skip a beat. "I had a good teacher." They spent the afternoon reviewing their plan and contingencies. Daniel would arrive at dusk with the equipment. They needed a camera with flash powder that his father used for documenting their livestock, dark clothing for stealth, and information about the Sullivans' planned cattle movement. "If something goes wrong," Rowan emphasized for perhaps the 10th time, "we separate and meet back here. No heroics, no waiting for each other, just get clear and regroup." Olivia nodded, her expression serious. "I understand, but nothing will go wrong, it can't." As the sun began to set, they shared a simple meal, both too tense to eat much. When Daniel arrived, right on schedule, his nervous energy was palpable. "The Sullivans started moving cattle to the north pasture this afternoon," he reported as he unpacked the camera equipment. "Fletcher and Horace are overseeing it themselves. They've got 3 men with them." "Any sign they suspect anything?" Rowan asked. Daniel shook his head. "They think I'm cowed by their threats, and they're too focused on this shipment. It's larger than usual. Must be 20 head at least." "That's a lot to lose if we expose them," Olivia observed. "Which is why they'll kill us if they catch us," Rowan reminded them grimly. "So let's not get caught." They rode out as full darkness descended, taking a circuitous route to approach the Sullivan property from the least expected direction. Daniel led them through stands of pine and across shallow stream beds, avoiding the main trails where the Sullivans might have posted lookouts. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the velvet sky like diamond dust. Under different circumstances, Rowan might have found it beautiful. Tonight, he was grateful only for the visibility it provided. They left their horses in a protected ravine about a half-mile from their destination, a high ridge overlooking the canyon, where Daniel said the cattle exchange would take place. From here, with the camera and its powerful flash powder, they could document the transaction without being seen. "We should be able to see both the altered brands and the money changing hands," Daniel whispered as they set up the equipment. "That's evidence not even Cooper could ignore." Rowan positioned himself slightly apart from the others, his revolver ready. His job was protection while they gathered the evidence they needed. They didn't have to wait long. Within an hour, they heard the distant sounds of cattle being moved, low moos, and the occasional shout from drovers. Then came the flicker of lantern light as a group of riders entered the canyon below. Through his field glass, Rowan could make out Fletcher and Horace Sullivan directing their men as they guided the cattle into the canyon's narrow confines. The animals' brands were clearly visible in the lantern light altered, just as Daniel had claimed. "Get ready," Rowan whispered to Daniel, who positioned the camera. Minutes later, 3 more riders approached from the opposite end of the canyon. The buyers from Idaho, right on schedule. "Wait until they're all together, exchanging money," Rowan advised. "We need clear evidence of the transaction." Daniel nodded, his hand steady on the camera despite the tension of the moment. Olivia crouched beside him, ready to assist with the flash powder. Below, the two groups met in the center of the canyon. Words were exchanged, then one of the Idaho men produced a saddlebag, from which he withdrew what appeared to be a significant amount of cash. "Now," Rowan whispered. Daniel triggered the camera as Olivia ignited the flash powder. A brilliant light illuminated the canyon for a split second, revealing the startled faces of the men below in stark relief. "Again," Rowan urged, and they repeated the process, capturing a second image of the now panicked rustlers. "We've got to move," Rowan said as shouts erupted from the canyon. "They'll be coming to investigate." They hastily packed the camera and plates, then retreated into the darkness, making their way back to the ravine where they'd left their horses. Behind them, they could hear men scrambling up the slope, lanterns bobbing as they searched for the source of the mysterious flashes. "Split up," Rowan ordered as they reached their mounts. "Daniel, take the plates and head straight for town. Find Judge Wilson. He arrived yesterday for court sessions and is staying at the hotel. He's outside the Sullivan's influence. Show him what we've documented." Daniel nodded, mounting his horse. "What about you two? We'll lead them away from you," Rowan replied. "Circle back to Olivia's cabin once we've lost them." Olivia touched Daniel's arm. "Be careful, and thank you for everything." With a nod, Daniel spurred his horse and disappeared into the night, heading south toward Dillon. Rowan and Olivia mounted their own horses and rode east, deliberately making enough noise to attract attention. "There they are," a voice shouted from behind them. "After them." The sound of pursuit was immediate and alarming, at least 3 riders moving fast. Rowan and Olivia urged their horses to greater speed, racing across the moonlit landscape. "This way," Rowan called, veering toward a stand of trees where the ground grew rocky and uneven. It would slow their pursuers, forcing them to pick their way carefully or risk laming their horses. The strategy worked. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter as they navigated the difficult terrain. By the time they emerged on the other side, they'd gained a significant lead. "I think we've lost them," Olivia said, breathing hard as they slowed their horses to a more sustainable pace. Rowan nodded, but his expression remained vigilant. "For now. But they know we have evidence against them. They'll come after us with everything they've got." They rode in silence for several minutes, taking an indirect route back toward Olivia's homestead. The adrenaline of their escape gradually subsided, replaced by a cautious optimism. "If Daniel makes it to Judge Wilson," Olivia said, "and if the photographs are clear enough, then the Sullivans will face justice," Rowan finished. "For the rustling, at least. And once their power is broken, we can address Jebediah's death and your self-defense claim." Olivia smiled, the moonlight catching in her hair. "We might actually win this." The hope in her voice warmed something inside him. "We might," he agreed. They were within sight of Olivia's cabin when a rifle shot split the night, the bullet whizzing past Rowan's head close enough that he felt its passage. His horse reared in alarm, nearly unseating him. "Ride," he shouted to Olivia, drawing his revolver. "Get to the cabin." More shots rang out as they spurred their horses forward. Rowan returned fire, aiming in the direction of the rifle flashes without much hope of hitting anything in the darkness. They reached the cabin at a gallop, leaping from their horses and rushing inside. Rowan barred the door behind them as Olivia grabbed her shotgun. "How did they find us so quickly?" she gasped, moving to a window to peer out. "They must have split up," Rowan replied grimly, checking his ammunition. "Some followed Daniel, others came here knowing we might return." A voice called from outside, confirming his suspicions. "We know you're in there, James. Come out now and maybe we'll let you live." Fletcher Sullivan's tone suggested the offer was far from genuine. "How many do you see?" Rowan asked, joining Olivia at the window. She squinted into the darkness. "3, maybe 4. Fletcher for sure. They're spreading out to surround the cabin." Rowan assessed their situation rapidly. The cabin was sturdy but not impregnable. They had limited ammunition and were outnumbered. If the Sullivans were determined enough, they could eventually break in or simply wait them out. Their only real hope was that Daniel had reached Judge Wilson with the evidence, and that help would come before the Sullivans breached their defenses. "We need to hold them off as long as possible," Rowan said, moving to another window. "Make every shot count." The next few hours passed in a tense standoff. Occasional shots from the Sullivans kept them pinned down, while Rowan and Olivia conserved their ammunition, firing only when they had clear targets. Fletcher made several attempts to approach the cabin under cover of his men's fire, but precise shots from Rowan drove him back each time. As dawn approached, however, Rowan realized they were running dangerously low on ammunition. He had only 6 bullets left for his revolver, and Olivia had fired most of the shotgun shells. "They're getting ready for something," Olivia whispered, peering through a crack in the shutters. "They're gathering by that big pine tree." Rowan joined her, watching as Fletcher distributed what looked like kerosene containers to his men. The implication was clear and horrifying. "They're going to burn us out," he said grimly. Olivia's face paled, but her voice remained steady. "What do we do?" Rowan considered their options, none of which were good. They could try to make a run for it, but in open ground they'd be easy targets. They could stay and fight, but they'd eventually be forced out by the flames or smoke. Or, "I'll surrender," he decided. "Draw their attention. Give you a chance to slip out the back while they're focused on me." "No," Olivia said immediately, gripping his arm. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself." "It's the only way one of us has a chance," Rowan insisted. "You can make it to the trees if I distract them." "Find Daniel and the judge." "And what happens to you in the meantime?" Olivia demanded, her eyes fierce in the dim light. "Fletcher will kill you the moment you step outside." "Maybe," Rowan acknowledged, "but he might want to make an example of me first." "Question me about the photographs, about who else knows. That would buy you time." Olivia shook her head stubbornly. "We stay together. Live or die, we face it together." The determination in her voice both frustrated and moved him. Before he could argue further, a commotion outside drew their attention back to the window. To their amazement, a group of riders was approaching from the direction of Dillon, at least a dozen men, led by what appeared to be Sheriff Cooper himself. Behind them rode Daniel Miller and an older, distinguished-looking man who could only be Judge Wilson. Fletcher and his men had also spotted the newcomers. They hesitated, clearly uncertain about this unexpected development. "Sullivan," Cooper's voice carried clearly in the morning air. "Drop your weapons. You're under arrest for cattle rustling, attempted murder, and conspiracy." Fletcher's response was predictable. He ordered his men to open fire, but they were outnumbered and outpositioned, caught in the open while Cooper's posse had the advantage of approach. The ensuing gunfight was brief but intense. When it ended, Fletcher Sullivan lay dead. 2 of his men were wounded, and the others had surrendered. Rowan unbarred the cabin door, stepping outside with his hands raised to show he wasn't a threat. Olivia followed close behind, her shotgun lowered but ready. Sheriff Cooper approached them, looking decidedly uncomfortable. "Miss James," he acknowledged with a nod. "Mr. Xander, seems I owe you both an apology." Judge Wilson dismounted, a stern-faced man with piercing eyes that suggested he missed very little. "The photographs your young friend brought are quite compelling evidence, Sheriff, as is his eyewitness testimony regarding Jebediah Sullivan's death." Daniel rode forward, a relieved smile breaking across his face. "We did it." The judge sent a telegram to the territorial marshal, and Sheriff Cooper, he glanced at the lawman with lingering suspicion, decided it would be in his best interest to cooperate. Cooper had the grace to look ashamed. "The Sullivans have held sway in this county for too long. I won't deny I've looked the other way on certain matters, but murder and rustling on this scale." He shook his head. "That's a line I won't cross." Judge Wilson turned to Olivia. "Young lady, based on Mr. Miller's testimony and the corroborating evidence, I see no reason to pursue charges against you in Jebediah Sullivan's death. Clear case of self-defense from what I've heard." Relief washed over Olivia's face. "Thank you, Your Honor." As Cooper's men dealt with the prisoners and Fletcher's body, Rowan found himself standing with Olivia at the edge of her porch, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. "It's over," he said, still hardly believing it himself. Olivia nodded, exhaustion and relief evident in every line of her body. "Thanks to you. If you hadn't stopped that day at the creek, you'd have found another way," Rowan said with certainty. "You're too stubborn to let the Sullivans win." She laughed softly, the sound warming him more than the morning sun. "Perhaps, but I'm glad it was you who found me washing that blood from my dress." She turned to face him fully. "Will you be leaving now, going back to Wyoming?" The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Rowan had been a drifter for most of his adult life, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots. His plan had always been to help Olivia, then move on, but plans could change. "That depends," he said carefully. "On what?" "On whether there might be reasons to stay." He met her gaze directly. "Good reasons." Olivia stepped closer, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her blue eyes. "I can think of a few," she said softly. "This land is too much for one person to manage alone, and I find I've grown accustomed to having you around, Rowan Xander." "Is that right?" he murmured, reaching out to tuck a strand of copper hair behind her ear. "It is." Her voice was steady, but he could see the vulnerability beneath her brave front. "So if you were considering staying, I wouldn't object." Rowan smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in years. "Then I suppose Wyoming can wait." When he finally kissed her, with the morning sun warming their faces and the promise of a new day stretching before them, Rowan knew he'd found something he hadn't even realized he was searching for: a home, and someone to share it with. Epilogue. The autumn of 1882 painted the hills around Dillon, Montana, in a riot of gold and crimson as Rowan Xander rode the boundaries of what was now the Xander James Ranch. 3 years had passed since he'd first discovered Olivia washing blood from her dress at the creek. 3 years that had transformed both their lives in ways neither could have imagined. The Sullivans' downfall had been swift and complete following the exposure of their rustling operation. Horace Sullivan had been sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison. Their ranch seized and divided among smaller landholders who had been victimized by the family over the years. Sheriff Cooper had resigned in disgrace, replaced by a younger, more principled man who had Daniel Miller as his deputy. Judge Wilson had ensured that Olivia's name was fully cleared in Jebediah's death, the official record showing justifiable homicide and self-defense. And as for Rowan and Olivia, they had married the following spring, combining their strengths to build something neither could have achieved alone. Their homestead had prospered, expanding to include more grazing land for their growing herd and a larger, more comfortable home to replace Olivia's small cabin. As Rowan crested the hill overlooking their property, he could see Olivia in the garden, harvesting the last of the season's vegetables. Beside her toddled their son, James Rowan Xander, nearly 2 years old now and the spitting image of his mother with the same copper hair and determined spirit. Rowan smiled at the sight. For a man who had never expected to settle down, who had wandered the West with no particular destination in mind, he had found a remarkably satisfying end to his journey. He urged whiskey down the slope toward home, toward the family that had given his life purpose and meaning. Olivia looked up at his approach, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. Even from a distance, he could see her smile, the same smile that had captivated him from the beginning. "Papa," James called, spotting him and waving enthusiastically. Rowan dismounted, scooping up his son and planting a kiss on Olivia's lips. "How are my favorite people today?" "Better now that you're home," Olivia replied, her eyes bright with the love that had only deepened over the years. "Any trouble with the north fence?" "All fixed," he reported. "And I checked the spring. Water's running clear despite the dry summer." "Good." She linked her arm through his as they walked toward the house, James chattering happily in his father's arms. "Daniel stopped by earlier. He and Sarah have set a date for their wedding next month, before winter sets in." Rowan nodded approvingly. Daniel had grown into a fine young man, respected throughout the county for his integrity and courage. His courtship of the schoolteacher had been the talk of Dillon all summer. "We'll need to find them a suitable wedding gift," he said as they reached the porch of their home, the home they had built together, both literally and figuratively. Olivia smiled, a secretive smile that immediately caught his attention. "Speaking of gifts," she said, placing a hand on her stomach in a gesture that made Rowan's heart skip a beat, "I think we might have some news of our own to share at their wedding." Joy surged through Rowan as he set James down and gathered Olivia in his arms. "You're sure?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. She nodded, eyes shining. "Dr. Bennett confirmed it this morning. Spring will bring us another little Xander." Rowan kissed her then, pouring all his love and gratitude into the embrace. When they finally separated, breathless and laughing, he rested his forehead against hers. "I never imagined I could be this happy," he confessed. "Not until I found you. Even though I was washing blood from my dress," she teased, referencing the moment that had brought them together. "Especially then," Rowan replied with a grin. "A man likes a woman with spirit." As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the land they had fought for and now cherished, Rowan Xander reflected on the strange, wonderful path that had led him here. A chance encounter, a bloodied dress, a woman brave enough to defend herself, all had combined to give him the greatest gift of his life. A love worth fighting for, a family worth protecting, and a home worth returning to day after day for all the days to come.